Welcome back. All right, about a week ago, Sportico released their rankings of team valuations. And I figured, it's a nice sunny Thursday in November. Why not go over those numbers? And I wanted to compare them a little bit to where the numbers were 5 years ago. So the numbers in red, that's 5 years ago, and it's not that long ago, and yet these teams have appreciated greatly in value. Now, where this could get sticky is that players know this. Players see this information come out. They realize that the NHL owners, their assets have appreciated in value. Then they look at the salary cap and go, well, shouldn't the salary cap go up? The reality is that franchise valuations going up or down has no effect on the salary cap because it's not league related revenue. And valuations are, it's so fluid, and it can rise or fall given different economic boons and busts and all that stuff. But right now, the Toronto Maple Leafs are worth $3.66 billion, up 38% from last year. And back in 2019, they were worth 1.5 billion. So they've more than doubled in value. So again, if you're a hockey player, you go, well, wait a minute. They've more than doubled in value. Our salary cap definitely hasn't doubled in value because, again, this isn't tied to the salary cap. The New York Rangers, $3.25 billion value. That's an increase of 33%. And in 2019, they were actually the most valuable franchise at 1.65 billion. So that's that 1.65 billion. If they were worth that now, they'd be about 16th in the league at that value. And then you got Montreal, 2.93 billion, an increase of 29%. They were worth 1.34 billion 5 years ago. So tremendous growth there. But Boston, huge growth there. $2.67 billion is what the value is now. It's an increase of 50% from last year, and they were worth $1 billion back in 2019. So just insane numbers. Same with LA, 2.5 billion is their current value. They went up 45%, and back in 2019 they were worth 850 million. It's a kind of a tidy sum. And this is the first year too where every team's worth more than $1 billion. So every owner doing all right. Chicago's worth 2.45 billion. That's an increase of 33%. They were worth 1.085 billion back in 2019. The Edmonton Oilers, $2.4 billion franchise valuation. That's an increase of 51%. They were worth 575 million 5 years ago. So the Oilers, tremendous, explosive amount of growth when it comes to the franchise's value, and a sign that the Oilers are pretty firmly entrenched in Edmonton. For all the discussion of Canadian American, Canadian teams, this and that, there are some Canadian teams on this board that are doing very, very well financially. No concerns. Philadelphia, $2.29 billion valuation. That's an increase of 35%. They were worth 825 million 5 years ago. And the average is 1.79 billion. So that's a pretty huge increase over last year. $1.86 billion valuation for the Capitals only. Now we're below 2 billion. An extra 31% valuation from last year, and they were worth 775 million back in 2019. So again, the Oilers have gone from one of the lower rated teams in terms of valuation to one of the top teams. Capitals stay around the middle, well, a little bit above the middle, I guess, at ninth. Detroit, I don't know how numbers work. Why would I know how numbers work? Detroit, 1.85 billion. That's an increase of 35%, and they were worth 800 million in 2019. Tampa Bay, $1.8 billion. That's an increase of 44%. They were only worth only worth $470 million back in 2019. I just look at these numbers and I think, well, they were only. Anyways, so it's been a big boost for Tampa Bay over the last 5 years in their valuations. The Vegas Golden Knights, $1.77 billion, an increase of 36%. They were worth $580 million as recently as 5 years ago. The Vancouver Canucks, $1.73 billion. That's an increase of 44%. They were worth $740 million in 2019. The New Jersey Devils, $1.7 billion. That's an extra 47% in their franchise valuation. They were worth $550 million 5 years ago. The New York Islanders, $1.68 billion. That's an increase of 49% from last year. They were worth $520 million in 2019. The Detroit, Dallas, Detroit's up here, Dallas down here. Wake up. $1.65 billion is the valuation for Dallas. That's an increase of 49%. $600 million 5 years ago. Man. So again, if you're a player looking at this, you're like, well, wait a minute. The thing is, if you're an owner, the only way to get that money is to sell your assets. So it's not cash in hand. And I think that's sometimes where that distinction has to be made. Your valuation on a property may go up, but you don't have extra cash in hand as a result unless you sell it, right? Your taxes may go up for it, but your taxes will go up for property, right? But your actual cash in hand does not. Then we get into the poorer half of the National Hockey League. Minnesota worth a paltry $1.6 billion, an increase of 36%, and 5 years ago they were worth $510 million. Calgary, $1.58 billion. That's an increase of 39%, and they were worth $500 million 5 years ago. Colorado Avalanche, $1.57 billion valuation. That's an increase of 34%. They were worth $475 million. Man, I had a B there. You know, I'm going to blame the entertainment guy. Yeah, the entertainment guy made this up. There you go. All done. And he's losing subscribers right, left, and center. So good on him. 475 million. I think that YouTube's removing bot accounts again. So I've noticed my subscriber counts on this channel staying about the same. And on the entertainment guy, just, yeah, nope, not so much. But Colorado, $475 million valuation back in 2019. Pittsburgh, $1.47 billion. That's an increase of 37%. They were worth $665 million back in 2019. Seattle didn't exist 5 years ago, so there's nothing to report on from that, but they're worth $1.46 billion this year, which is an increase of 30% from last year. San Jose, despite not having very good attendance, and I've seen a lot of people reporting on that, well, the franchise is worth $1.42 billion. It's an increase of 34%, and the franchise was worth $540 million back in 2019 when it was a much better team on the ice. So, no, the team on the ice being bad, the attendance being bad, it did nothing to injure their overall value as a franchise. Nashville, $1.32 billion valuation. That's an increase of 33%. They were worth $460 million back in 2019. St. Louis, $1.3 billion. That's an increase of 35%. They were worth $530 million back in 2019. And then there's Carolina, $1.29 billion, which is an increase of 32%. They were worth $450 million back in 2019. Florida, big glow up for Florida, $1.25 billion cap hit. $1.25 billion valuation. Man, players will be like, all right, $1.25 billion cap. Woohoo! But yeah, they've improved by 37% over the last year, and they were only worth $310 million back in 2019. Again, a change in management has had a huge boost for that Florida organization, and they're really feeling it on and off the ice. Anaheim, $1.24 billion valuation. That's an improvement of 27%. Slackers, only going up 27%. They were worth $480 million back in 2019. Utah, this is why you move Arizona right here. $1.2 billion valuation. From last year's Arizona valuation to this one, that's an improvement of 78%. Arizona was worth $300 million back in 2019. So that is part of the reason why that move takes place. Yes, the arena being part of it too, and all of the frustrations with that market. But the fact that this franchise is worth 78% more now in Utah than what it was in Arizona says a lot about the move, and Utah's doing everything they can to make sure that they can have long-term success there too. Utah, I just did. Ottawa, $1.14 billion. I caught myself on that. $1.14 billion valuation for Ottawa, only a 20% rise over last year. $445 million was their valuation back in 2019. Buffalo, $1.13 billion, only 26% improvement over last year. They were worth $400 million back in 2019. For Winnipeg, $1.1 billion. That's only a 19% improvement over last year. $420 million was their valuation back in 2019. This is where I can remind you that one of the owners of the Winnipeg Jets is extremely rich, and therefore improvement of only 19%. I think they'll be okay. There's no danger with Winnipeg, and I keep saying, oh, they'll move Winnipeg. You guys are forgetting that this is a really one of the richest men in Canada owns the Winnipeg Jets, so they're okay. And then you got Columbus, $1.06 billion valuation, an improvement of 20% from last year, and they were worth $326 million back in 2019. What we've got here is a league that's worth a lot of money. We've got a league where every single team has appreciated in value over the last year. And this is part of the reason why Gary Bettman, whose picture's still up there, this is one of the reasons why his job is pretty safe. NHL owners are experiencing a lot of growth from their franchises, from their revenues. These numbers were apparently gone over by various accountants and people with inside knowledge of teams, and even NHL owners were shown the numbers to say, look, how accurate is this? So these numbers are pretty darn accurate and paint a picture of a league that is showing improvement. And I was reading an article today that Emily Kaplan wrote about the pending CBA expiration and how the NHL and the NHLPA, there's a lot of optimism about the next CBA. There are certain things that players are interested in maybe getting in on, and like expansion revenues. The NHL players are kind of like, hey, can we get a cut of that? The NHL's been very much against that, which again, if they were going to expand, why wouldn't they just give it to them? If they weren't going to expand, why wouldn't they just give it to them? So there's that. But I guarantee that players are looking at this, and then they're looking at the salary cap and wondering how they could make it so the salary cap would go up a little bit more. The tricky thing is, if they want more money, I could almost guarantee that NHL owners would counter with, maybe we won't have guaranteed contracts then, because they'll want a concession from the union, and the union would not want to give up guaranteed contracts. That could create a potential mess. I've seen fans saying, oh, guaranteed contracts are the problem. I disagree. I think that guaranteed contracts are fine. It's been that way as long as I can remember, and it will be interesting to see if these franchise valuations go up again next year. If we see similar appreciation next year, does that cause more of an issue with the union, or is it solved by then? Because there's a very real spirit that says, hey, they want to work together, they want to make this work, they could have an extension on the CBA done by the spring. I would be so insanely relieved not to have to worry until the very last minute that there might be a lockout, that they might not get it done. Hopefully they get it done in the spring, because heading that off, it makes more sense for the players and the NHL to want to head that off, because salary cap is rising. They're making record revenues. The players are making record amount of money on the whole, right? And so it is in their best interests not to have a lockout and not to have a prolonged fight. But these numbers are high. There's some owners right now that have some assets that have appreciated greatly over the last 5 years. And so the question becomes one of, how much of that might end up going to the players. Do we see like a one-time payment or something along those lines, where players maybe when a franchise appreciates in value by a certain amount, they get a certain amount of money as well. Something like that, right? Mark Messier in his contract with the Vancouver Canucks back in the day, there was a provision in there that if the Canucks value went up as a franchise, he got a certain amount, and he got it. So maybe we see something like that in the next CBA. Maybe we see something along those lines. And, just again, I would think just a one-time payment. But if these valuations keep going up, it is going to be interesting to see if that has some kind of an impact on the relationship between the league and the union. Because generally when somebody, like the Oilers here, an improvement of 51% to $2.4 billion, probably not going to want to give away a whole bunch of that money. You're probably going to really enjoy that money. So we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.